Hi, it's JP. In this video, we are going to talk about nested components. Components are great when you want to have a more maintainable and more consistent web applications. In a previous video, I've shown you how to create a very simple one, but you can also have more complex one by nesting them together. For instance, you can put a button component inside of a card. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly this one example, and we'll see how to customize those nested components and how to use the workflows triggered by them. So let's dive in. So this is the current setup. We have this button component. It's a very basic button component, and we have two properties to it. First, we have the label, which defines the label of the button, and then we have the variant that chooses the style of the button, and we have the secondary and the primary one. If I go inside of the edit mode of that component, we see that label is bound to the text property, and we have other properties that are defined by the variant. So we have the text color, the background, and the border, but that's not the point of the video. So that's our basic component. So we're going to create a card that will be used throughout our application. So we want a component that can be versatile. We want the label to be different depending on the context, and we want to execute different action depending also on the context. So let's begin by creating our card components. I'm going to select the card and I'm going to hit new component. Let's name that card, and right now we are inside of the edit mode of our component. I'm going to quickly go back to my instance and I'm going to duplicate it so we have multiple instances of our component and see how each modification that we are going to make to our card component will affect the different instances. So right now, if I go inside of my card component, if I go to my primary button, for instance, if I'm changing it here, we can see that it changes on every instance of my card, and that's not what we want. We want each of those instances to be independent and have their own label and their own buttons. So if we look back at our button here, we can see that it is those props that define the content of our button. But unfortunately, if we go inside of our card here, we have no properties to bound to the button directly. And if we go inside of our card component, we have access to these properties, but it will be replicated in each instances of our card. So what we need to do now is actually go to the card properties and create new ones that will be used by the different buttons for our two buttons. So the first one will be let's call it the primary button and call that label. Let's put a default label of label and hit create. We'll do the same for the secondary button. I'm just going to copy it and let's call that secondary button. Hit save. And now if I go to my label, if I go to my first button and on the label here, I'm going to bind it to the primary button label, and the second one will be bound to the secondary button label. So right now, if I go back to my instance, to my card instance, I can enter any label, and this will only affect the instance of my cards, and the second instance here can have a totally different label. So this was for the label of our buttons, and for the sake of the demonstration, we're going to create a new select that will indicate the type or the variants of the buttons for each of the two buttons that we created on our cards. So let's add it as a primary button variant, and that will be the select. and we had the primary value and the secondary value. By default, it will be primary. Let's hit create, and I'm going to duplicate it. And instead of the primary, we'll be going with the secondary. The default value will be secondary. I hit save, and again, I'm going to bind the variant here to the primary button variant, and the second one will be the secondary variant. So you'll notice that we've kind of duplicated the props of our buttons inside of our card buttons. And if you have a lot of components inside of your main components, it can be very messy. So be careful to name your properties in a correct way or in a clear way so that you can go through them easily. So if I go here and select any cards, and if I change the variant of it, then I can basically switch the styles of my buttons. And that's pretty much all I wanted to do with the style or the customization of my buttons. And of course, right now I've just added the styles for the buttons, but of course you can have the title of your cards defined as properties, and that would be just like any other properties that you have. For instance, title of my card. So what we want to do now is execute actions when the user clicks on the primary button or clicks on the secondary buttons. And again, the same logic applies for the properties. We don't want the same action to be executed by all the instances, but we want different actions depending on the instance of the card. So if we go and select our primary button here, and if we create a new workflows, for instance, that would be a custom JavaScript, and we'll be returning the console log total. And if I go and inspect, let's go out and inspect what it's going to do. If I hit any of those primary buttons, they will all do the same thing, like in this case, return total. That's not what we want. We actually want each of these instances to perform a completely different action. And we want to define those actions at the instance level. But if I go to my instance, I have no way currently to know when the user clicks on the primary button or the secondary button. And that's where triggers come into play. If we look at the trigger of the workflows here, we have a lot of them that are pre-created, that are already existing, like the on-click, on double-click, etc. And what we want actually is to create custom ones. So let's go inside of our card. We're going to create two new events. The first trigger that we want to create will be the on primary button click. We can leave the event schema empty, and we're going to create a new second one that will be the on secondary button click. So if we go back now to the instance of our card, if I go back to the workflow that I've created, we can see now that we have two new element triggers that are appearing on the list, and that correspond to the one that we just created. So this workflow will only execute when this on primary button click is emitted. So that's the final thing that we need to do inside of our card, is to emit this event when the user clicks on the buttons. So I'm going to go back inside of my card component. I'm going to select the first button that is our primary button, and I'm going to go to the workflow that is here. We're going to leave the on-click trigger because we want to emit the trigger when the user clicks on the button. And instead of that JavaScript, we're going to search for the trigger event workflows. So that's an action that's only available when you are inside of a component. So it's a component specific action. And if we look at the properties that it has, we can choose the event that we want to emit. and on the primary button we want to emit this one. The event value can remain empty. We don't necessarily want to pass any value to it with it. And that's pretty much it for our button. I'm going to close this. Let's go out of this instance of this component, and we are going to add an action here to see what's happening, if this trigger is actually executed. And again, I'm going to have an execute a console log on this workflow. So this basically means that every time that the primary button is clicked, it will log the clicked text inside of my console. So if I go here on my first one, if I hit this first button, the primary button, it will log the clicked text. But if I click on any of the other ones, nothing happens, and that's exactly what's expected. Because if I go to my second card, we've defined no workflows on it. But if I go and copy this one, I'm going to paste it on this second event. I'm going to change what's logged inside of my console log. Then if I go back in preview mode, so the first one is returning clicked, and the second one is returning clicked too. Every instance of my card will trigger a different action based on what we define at the instance level, and that's exactly what we wanted. So I can do the same thing for the secondary button. I'm going to on primary button clicked. Just going to rename that properly. I'm going to hit copy. I'm going to select the secondary button, and I'm going to pass that, and instead of trigger or emitting the on primary button click, I'm going to emit the on secondary button click. Can rename this workflow. If I want to execute something else on the secondary button click, then I can create a new workflow on secondary button click and perform another specific action based on what I want. So this was the basic setup of a component. We've seen how to customize the different properties of our nested components. We've learned how to emit different triggers that we can use on the main instances that will trigger any action that we want based on our context. So by using all of those things to build components and nest components inside of them, allow for more versatile components that we can use throughout all of our application and on different contexts, that creates more powerful components in the end. So I hope that was useful, and I'll see you on the next one.